like to taste hundreds of wines every year and to get paid for it? Are you curious about new styles of wine and which regions or types of grapes and blends you should be trying right now? Well, you're in luck tonight because our two wonderful guests who are joining us have all the answers on those questions, plus a whole lot more and some terrific stories. I'm Natalie McClain, and I offer popular online wine and food pairing classes at nataliemcclain.com. And you've just joined some of the most interesting and passionate people in the world of wine, where we gather every 7 p.m. or every Wednesday at 7 p.m. to talk to them and to share a glass or two. Now, I want to hear from you. I'm live streaming this for the first time on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. It's based on a recorded conversation that we had with these two guests, and it's for the podcast. And I'm going to be jumping into the comments this evening and chatting with you, answering questions. I do want to hear from you. If you're watching this on the replay, type the word replay. Let me know where you're logging in from. If you're here with me live, let me know that too, and what's in your glass. What takeaways are you enjoying the most? What questions do you have that we're not answering for you? Let me know. All right, back to our guests. So both of these women are very highly trained wine experts, and they together host the Wine Unfiltered podcast. I feel like they're soul sisters. We're unreserved, they're unfiltered. And they both work for the US-based wine retail club, Wine Access. So you can order directly wines from them, very popular club. Amanda McCrossin was formerly a wine director at several prestigious Napa Valley restaurants, where she worked with the world's largest collection of Napa Valley wines. And in 2018, she was named one of the Wine Enthusiasts Wine Star Sommeliers. Vanessa Conlin is head of wine for Wine Access, and she formerly worked at several of Napa's most prestigious wineries. She became a master of wine in 2020, and together they share some uncanny similarities that we're going to get into because they were both musical performers in New York City before moving to Napa. And they join me now. Vanessa, Amanda, welcome. We're so glad to have you here.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you. Good to be
Natalie.
here.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I'm hoping the tech is working because this is the first time I'm using this program. It's like, oh no, I just did that all to myself in the universe. All right, cool. This is
Seems
great.
great.
Okay, it's so good. So Vanessa, I know you're in Napa. Where are you logging in from, Amanda?
Well, my home base is in Santa Helena in
Can
Napa,
you
but I'm
hear me
actually,
okay, Amanda? Yeah?
I can
Okay.
hear you. Yeah. Can you hear me? Can you
Okay,
hear me
good.
or no?
Yes, I
Okay.
can.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. Yeah, my home
Yeah,
base
I
is
can.
also in Saint Helena, but yeah, I'm actually on the East Coast right now in snowy weather just outside of Philadelphia. I took the opportunity now that I'm sort of out of restaurants and can work from anywhere to be closer to family for the last year.
Ah, good for you. That's a good timing strategically. All right, so let's before we dive into some of the questions here, I wanted to hear from both of you. Kind of take Vanessa. We'll start with you. What's been the best moment of your career in wine so far?
Um, well, honestly, so far I feel like I almost don't know because it keeps changing
That's
and,
good.
and evolving. So I don't know that I've had my best moment yet. I mean, I get excited every time I get to go to a new region that I've never visited or learn something new, which is one of the things that I most enjoy about wine is that there's no end to what can be learned.
That's true.
Um, who knows? But I mean, I think looking back sort of early in my career, just getting my first real retail job, just actually, walking in and interviewing and having that person actually think I knew what I was talking about enough to put me on the retail floor. This was in New York City. I thought, okay, I've learned enough that I can, I at least fooled her for now. So that was a moment where I thought, okay, actually, like I think I have a place here. I'm gonna stay.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think we all feel that anxiety when we first start into wine. It's like, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? There's so much to learn, and who am I to answer anyone's questions? But you have to dive in somewhere.
Yeah.
Amanda, how about you?
Yeah, Vanessa, that's such a good one because I think we all feel that imposter syndrome that never really truly leaves us. I don't know, maybe now that you're an MW, maybe you felt differently, but every now and then I'm still like, do I know anything? For me,
Yeah.
I think for me, it was moving to Napa Valley, the transition from becoming a New York sommelier, which is also a very momentous time and place in my career, but I think that those first few days of living in Napa Valley and realizing that I was going to be not only working with the wine list that I was working with, but also the people and the community and the place, it just sort of struck me. And honestly, it was the reason that I started my Instagram, my YouTube channel. So I think, if I look back throughout the timeline, which like Vanessa said, is just riddled with lots of wonderful, great memories, that was probably the biggest and the best one for me.
Okay, cool. Now, I meant to reverse this because I believe in happy endings, but I was going to ask you first, what have been the low points? Is there any story that comes to mind in terms of a low point in your world of wine so far, Vanessa?
Not really. I mean, I
Okay.
have to say, no, I mean, I would say, I hate that moment when you are with a group of people and someone has brought a bottle that they're really excited to share with you, and it ends up being corked.
Oh,
Those are,
yeah,
those are the worst moments. But no,
it's true.
I really can't think of a worse moment. I definitely had challenges in terms of, things I had to learn along the way in terms of experience, or certainly studying for the MW exam. There were, plenty of hard days, where you have to just, pick yourself up and brush yourself off and keep going. But I wouldn't actually
Sure.
call that a bad day or a worse day. It was just all part of the process.
Sure. Good attitude. All right, Amanda.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me it was the fires. I think that was the first time I
Hmm.
really realized how connected I was to the valley was when, our community was in trouble, both in 2017 and 2020. But I think to Vanessa's point, those are low times, and I felt an enormous amount of sadness, fear, all the things that we associate with low points. But ultimately, there was a silver lining on all of that, and it brought the community closer together. It made us all stronger. It seems to be a history repeating itself because these are sort of the moments that end up rebuilding us and making us stronger and propelling us into the future. So, yeah, I mean, I think those moments were low, but filled with highs at the end of it.
That's great. And just because you've touched on forest fires, how does that stand right now? Vanessa and I were chatting a little bit before you joined in on this program, but I'm sure people are curious. What's happening right now in California and forest fires?
Well, there's
Uh,
nothing happening right now. I mean, I think,
Okay.
California, Northern California is always going to have, the threat of fires because of
Hmm.
just, how densely forested we are. But no, right now, I mean, I'll be back there next week and Vanessa's there now, so she can speak to the greenery. But every time I
mhm.
get on the phone with someone from Napa or hop on a Zoom, it's like, we're open, we're green, it's beautiful, come visit.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
exactly. There's fire season really starts, around, well, now it starts around July.
mhm.
These days. But no, right now, I mean, it's raining outside my window right now. It's green. Yeah, Napa Valley is definitely open, and I'd see driving up and down the valley. It probably looks very different than what it might have looked like on the news when these things happen, where it's sort of,
Sure.
we did lose a lot. We lost a lot, but the we didn't lose the entire valley. You can still drive
Mm.
up and down Silverado Trail or Highway 29, and really not even notice that happened. So we're definitely excited to welcome people back here.
Well, that's good. That's good. There's our happy ending.
Always.
So, yeah. So you guys have some, as I said, some striking similarities in terms of your career journey. You were both based in New York City, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you were in musical or theater performers, and then you made your way into the wine industry and moved like from there almost across the country to Napa Valley. Vanessa, let's start with you. Your father was
Mhm.
a symphony conductor, if I understand correctly, and your mother
Yes.
was also in music, and then you became an opera singer.
Yes.
What was that like? What was performing like?
I really grew up around it. So, and my mother was a opera singer too.
Okay.
And she does more on the arts administration side, fundraising, grant writing, etc. But they're both, both still involved in music. So I'm an only child, and spent a lot of my childhood sort of, I won't say being dragged because I actually enjoyed it, but sitting in orchestra rehearsals, after
Right.
school, and so it was a little bit of a
Yeah.
unusual childhood. There was always music in my house one way or another, whether it was my father playing the piano or my mother singing, or she also taught voice lessons. So I felt like it was in my DNA. I never really thought about doing anything else other than
Hmm.
being a musician.
Yeah. Wow.
Until until I already had a master's degree, which is serving me really well now. But I have a I moved to New York City, got a master's degree in music, and like all starving artists, had to work in restaurants as a server. So
Ah,
I
okay.
that
Was
was
that your
really
segue into the world of wine?
it piqued my interest for sure. I mean, I had
Okay.
definitely, had a little bit here and there, tried it, but I honestly didn't know much of anything about it, other than I thought it was fascinating, and I knew I wanted to learn more. So I took a class in between gigs. Opera singing is very sort of gig to gig. It's very rare that you have a long extended contract. So I had some downtime in New York, and Amanda and I have talked about this before, that I don't have what people refer to as an epiphany bottle, which is usually some very fancy or expensive bottle that blows up your mind. And I did not have that. I actually
Interesting.
way too much of a dork for that. I took a class, and this
Ah,
wine class just honestly opened my mind in a way to this world that I never wanted to close. So
oh wow.
that was
Yeah,
really
you've
it. That was
said
the segue.
you're a study nerd, aren't you?
Yes,
Yes.
unabashedly.
Absolutely. Yeah, so the life of the opera singer, gig to gig, you
Mhm.
said, and it seems like it's very restricting in terms of some comments you've made before in terms of your diet. So were you allowed to have wine, or
I
how
mean,
did
it's
the two go together?
Yeah, it's of course based on the individual and what they believe is good for them. But no, I mean, performing, your body is your instrument, and particularly with
Yes.
opera singing, I mean, it's just these two little vocal cords, right? It's not like sitting in a
Right.
piano or picking up a violin. So
Right.
it's in and the secret of the trade is actually, if you don't perform, you don't get paid. So
Right.
even if you've gone through the entire rehearsal process, if you get to that performance day and you're not well enough to go on, that you're going home with nothing. So it's taken very seriously. So yeah, I would do things like, avoid caffeine, spicy food, certainly alcohol, and avoid crowded places, so I wouldn't have to be worried about getting sick, but also not talk over a crowd so that I wouldn't tire my voice. And there's a lot of things that it's actually can be quite a lonely lifestyle, actually, in that, and that you're sort of always trying to kind of isolate yourself and kind of avoid all the things that are really fun, like drinking
Right.
and eating and talking to people. So,
Sure. Oh wow. Yeah, it is restricted. I mean, I trained as a dancer. You say your body as a microphone or as an instrument. I always thought of my body as a paintbrush. Amanda, I know you've taken ballet lessons too, right?
Yeah, I was a
Yeah.
classically trained ballet dancer before I did
Oh wow.
anything on
Look
stage.
at
That
all
was my
this.
first love. Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
It's amazing that
absolutely.
Vanessa and I didn't connect sooner,
I know you
but
yeah,
so
sound like
grateful that we
sisters
did.
meant to meet. I mean,
yeah,
over the same bottle. It's
yeah,
uncanny. But
Yeah.
Amanda, you also were in musical theater along with ballet, voice lessons or acting lessons, that sort of thing, before wine.
Yeah, my whole life was on the stage. I started fairly young, like I said, as a classical ballet dancer, and then I got into musical theater by way of the high school doing a production of The Music Man, and unbeknownst to my parents, I had a voice. So that's where my official journey started. That was like part one of my professional career because I worked as a stage actress when I was a kid and through my teens, and then ended up going to school for musical theater. Graduated, like Vanessa said, we are always working, odd jobs here and there. So
yeah.
found my way up to New York and was working at a private club. And throughout all of this, my parents were never into wine, but they were very into food. So,
Okay.
and they also were not on the stage. So I was not around theater. I was not around wine. It's a miracle that I got into either of those professions. But when I got up to New York, I felt like, I was at the epicenter of the cultural universe, and I wanted to really take part in everything that had to offer. So pulling from my background with my parents taking us to great restaurants, I felt like wine was, the sort of the last frontier, but I didn't know how to get into it. So when I was working at the Core Club, a gentleman who had been the sommelier at Le Bernardin had started, and I just started picking his brain one night, and that's sort of how it all happened. He really opened a lot of doors and helped me enroll in classes and helped me get my first sommelier job.
Huh. And what ways do the two of you think that wine and music are similar? Is there, I mean, it sounded like they were a clash for you, Vanessa. You couldn't even partake or enjoy, or would, dehydrate you. But what are the similarities do you find between wine and music?
Oh, I think there are a ton of similarities, and that, what I referenced was really just trying to sort of stay healthy to actually
Yes.
be a performer. But in terms of, um, the enjoyment of both, I often talk about the how how they're similar in that even the words we use, balance, harmony, there are so
Mm.
many things that we're saying that could be one or the other if you didn't know the context. But I think also they're both ways to kind of get in touch with your senses, in
Mm.
terms of feeling. I feel like we spend so much time in a digital world now. We've got our device in front of us, and it's a way to kind of feel human again, to and just enjoy something, just with what's, already part of your body without any sort of outside stimulation. So I think they're incredibly similar. And I think also what's fascinating about that is they're both enjoyed very individually, whereas the three of us could sit down over the same bottle of wine and leave with a different experience. And I think that is such an intriguing point, to be able to talk about what we find that's similar among us, and then what we might find that's different, and how that plays into our enjoyment of it.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I love your comment about it sort of engages all the senses. Like, again, I default to dancing, but, it's if I watch a ballet performance, I have a muscular response to it. Amanda, you might as well. Like when someone does a jeté, it's like my calves kind of do this. Um, and I think sometimes wine can be like that too. And the more you understand it, the more you have a full-bodied, full sensory reaction to it. But Amanda,
Mhm.
what kind of similarities do you find, or do you think that beyond similarities, that music affects our perception of wine?
Well, I mean, certainly everything's going to affect our perception of wine. I think it's one of those things that we can sort of take in with all of our senses. But similarities wise, I mean, I think Vanessa touched on a few of them. I would also add that, coming from a theatrical background, and Vanessa, music and theatrics, there, wine, we always tried to sort of quantify to people as being, either as being sort of the sum of art and science. And I think music
Mm.
in many ways is that. Like, you can't have
Mm.
a great piece of music or a great piece of theater, or a great, classical ballet dancer. You can't have that without technique, without science, without knowing, the
Mm.
mechanism behind what we're doing, and having that be the foundational element. And then the art sort of comes after that. And so to understand how those two things can really work together, that they're not, they're not working in parallel, they're sort of like working in tandem. I think that sort of, for our creative brains, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's where I find the similarities in wine, is being able to understand that those two things working together, like that's really where the magic happens.
I love that. I love that metaphor, or the way you've put the science and art together. Do you think that there are also similarities in the intimidation factor between wine and maybe more so opera, Vanessa? I'm not sure, because people feel like they have to be experts first before they can enjoy it.
I do, and you actually almost answered my question for me. Is that um, I do think that there is a perceived barrier to entry, which really shouldn't exist, doesn't exist, but that there is, I think, coming back to my sort of background in music and growing up with two classical musicians, this was something that we talked about a lot, because of course classical music is, struggling to stay relevant, to have new younger people be interested, and so we would often sort of brainstorm, how can we make this more accessible, without changing the core of what it is. There was very much a perception, and I'm sure there still is, that you need to know something, that you're going to
Mm.
go in and look silly because you're not going to understand what they're saying, or you don't know the background of the composer or the artist. And really, music was always meant to just be enjoyed by the people. Now, sometimes that was meant for the emperor, but that's another story. But really, it wasn't meant to be something that you had to know going in. It was meant to be entertaining, to bring people together, to inspire conversation. But that in itself is similar to wine, I find, in that sometimes, and I remember this of myself before I got into wine, looking at a label, let's say something from France, and thinking, I don't know how to pronounce any of this, let alone what's in the bottle. And so I do definitely think that there is some intimidation, but I know that Amanda and I feel really passionately about sort of breaking that down, because like music, wine is meant to be enjoyed, shared with friends. You certainly can get studious about it, spend a lot of money if you want to, but ultimately it's meant to be, something that's just pure pleasure.
Absolutely. And a lot of folks say they're demystifying wine, and making it more accessible, but how do you do that?
Um, I mean, I think that finding someone that you like to learn from, whether that's a book, a class, listening to something like this podcast or the Wine Access Unfiltered podcast, where we're talking about wine, watching videos. There's so many ways to digest information these days.
Hmm.
Talking to someone at your local shop, honestly, just starting to ask questions, going to a wine tasting and asking questions. I think you just have to start somewhere, and you sort of start peeling back the first layer of the onion, and before you know it, there's a lot of knowledge in your pocket. So
Hmm.
just taking that first step, I think.
Yeah, that's the hardest, isn't it? Once you get a
Hmm.
foothold, then it's got a grip on you, actually.
Yeah.
um, so, Amanda, do you remember the moment you decided to move from New York to Napa? That's a big move. What
I
prompted that?
do. I actually just was talking about it the other day because I had a great conversation with Rod Berglund of Joseph Swan Winery over in Sonoma,
Okay.
and I was, as I mentioned, I was working in New York as a sommelier, had a great job at a small restaurant with a really wonderful wine list, but it was, sort of on the small side and a really focused wine list. And I didn't work with a team, and I knew that I wanted to. I think, working with wine, how do you demystify wine? You just surround yourself with people that know more than you do.
Hmm.
And that's, the same for a sommelier. You demystify, you get better at it by surrounding yourself with people who are smarter, that know different things, that can teach you, either through osmosis or will sit down with you. But I decided that I had wanted to expand my horizons and ended up connecting with Scott and Kelly at Press Restaurant in St. Helena. And I flew out there to do a stage. I had a conversation with them. Didn't really know what I wanted. I knew my lease was running up in, like, a matter of about 2 months, month and a half, which if you've ever lived in New York, that's like a really critical moment in anyone's New York journey. Like, what do I do?
Yeah.
So I flew out there. I staged for 2 nights, which means, I just went around the restaurant and sort of helped out with wine service. Felt like if I felt fit in with the culture there and the people. And second night, Kelly sits me down at the bar and says, let's have some food, see if you like it. Let me open some wine for you. And she ended up opening a 1987 Joseph Swan Zinfandel.
Ah,
And for anyone who's ever been to press, that like the cellar was just riddled with, crazy, crazy back vintages of Napa Valley wine and, occasionally some Sonoma stuff as well. So she opens this wine and I'm eating the food and I'm talking to her and I'm like, you're a fool if you don't think that this is a great idea to move to Napa Valley right now. So I literally got on the plane, hours later because I had a super early flight to get back to New York to my job. And on the flight, I wrote an email to them and I said, if you are willing to have me, I'd love to move out here. And that was the moment. And then 3 weeks after that, I was living in Napa Valley with a quick jaunt to Bordeaux in the center.
good Lord, you pack it in.
Sure
A
do.
quick jaunt to Bordeaux.
Quick jaunt to Bordeaux. Why not?
Wow. Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Wow, that's quite the journey. And how about you, Vanessa? How did you land in Napa?
Well, I lived in New York for a number of years. I love New York City, but definitely felt like in terms of a wine career, the thing that I was really missing and wanting to dig deeper into was being actually around vineyards and winemaking.
Hmm.
Because of course in New York City, you could drive up to the North Fork or Finger Lakes, but I was working, in retail, and as a wine director at a wine bar in Manhattan. So that was not something that I really, had the opportunity to be around. So I started thinking about it. Of course, it was a big move. But there was definitely a moment where, New York City, it's a nice day. I thought, oh, I'll go to Central Park and just like, put a blanket down, have a little, glass of rosé and think this over. And of course, it's a nice day in New York City. Every single other person has the exact same idea. So I remember getting there, like trying to find like a little wedge of lawn to put my, my blanket down on, and sitting there, and like literally, I think within 2 minutes, I got hit by a soccer ball and a frisbee. And I just thought, okay, like this is a sign. So I moved out. I did not have a job. I
Wow.
took a rental based on the iPhone video that a friend took of it. So I had actually never
Really?
seen it in person.
Okay.
Yeah. So just kind of, took the attitude of like leap and the net will appear. Moved out, and then there were plenty of jobs on, I'm sure you've heard of the website winejobs.com. When I
Hmm.
was looking, when living in New York, for jobs out here, and then I got out here and everything had just basically completely dried up all of a sudden. So I took my first job was working in the tasting room at Robert Mondavi Winery.
Oh,
And
that's a good place to start.
yeah, so I came out here really wanting to work for a winery, which of course eventually I did. But I have to tell you that even though that wasn't my plan to work in the tasting room, it was an outstanding introduction to Napa Valley, to really get to know. Obviously, I had to tell the story of Napa and the history, and his history, which is so crucial to the history of
Mm.
this entire place. So, really getting intimate with that, meeting people, hearing their questions about Napa Valley. It was probably the best unplanned introduction to living here that I possibly could have gotten.
Wow, sight unseen, no job. You just land there with apparently your cat and a blow up mattress.
Yes, yes, that is a choose, and my
And
laptop.
now
Those are
there's
the
many
two.
Oh,
there's many cats now.
oh,
Yes.
really? Okay, well,
Yeah.
you've settled
We'll
in then.
we'll probably get in. There's like a 50-50. Well, it's actually like an 80-20 uh, possibility of a cat appearance during this podcast. So
Oh,
You'll
really?
just
How
see a
many cats do
tail
you
kind of wiggling.
really? How many cats do you
yeah.
have?
I currently have three, but I've had as
Okay.
many as five. I'm also very
Okay.
involved with an animal rescue organization out
That's
here. So
right. What do you do with them? I meant to ask you about that. You do
um,
fundraising?
I do. Well, I've chaired. There's an annual fundraiser called. It's a wine charity wine auction called Wineapalooza, which Amanda has also been a part of, and will be this year as well. We're very lucky to have her. So I've chaired the auction in previous years. I'm co-chairing it this year, but then I'm also board chair for the
Ah,
organization.
oh, very good. And do you name
Yeah.
your cats after wine?
No, actually, all of my cats are named after old movie stars. So I have
Oh, okay.
Grace Kelly, Ava Gardner. We have Vivian Lee, and then I've had Frank Sinatra, and then also Scarface,
Oh,
which is
right. That's
the only
great.
non-actual person. It's the only character, but yes, so
Very good.
not wine.
That's awesome. So, I mean, for both of you, maybe Amanda, was it hard to leave musical theater? I mean, I know it's the gig, it can be nerve-wracking gig to gig, but I mean, that's quite a switch to just leave kind of something you've been professionally trained in and started a career in, and then over to wine.
Yeah, no, it's something that I thought about a lot in more in retrospect, I guess now, but I guess at the time I it was a slow sort of gradual pull away. Like there wasn't one particular moment where I was like, all right, I think it's time. I guess there was when I, took my first MLA job, but I never really had a conversation with anyone about it other than myself. And I sort of laid up at night, like, I think there's, I've heard, I was only 25 at the time. I've heard there's times in life where you have to choose paths. And so I was sort of at that moment and I was like, I have all these great opportunities sort of coming my way. I've always wanted to see the world. I'm single. I want to travel. I want to eat. I want to drink. And as much as I love my job on the stage, and it was very much my career, I was like, I think this is maybe a time where you should just try it, see how it is. If you hate it, you can go back to it. You've got a degree and you know what you're doing. On that side, maybe it's time to try something new. But it was sort of like losing your first love.
Mm.
I had deep, deep relationship with the theatrical world, and sort of leaving that behind was a little bit painful, and I missed it. But I also sort of, one of the moments that I realized that I was like, maybe this is time to divert, was when, I'd open the New York Times, and instead of going to the arts section, I was going to the food and wine section. So I
Yes,
think when you start realizing where your priorities are lying, you start to
that's a
make
great way to
decisions
put
for
it.
yourself.
Awesome. And Vanessa, your parents, you grew up in music. I mean, how did
Mhm.
they react? And what were you feeling when you kind of decided to make that change?
They were not happy at the time,
Yeah.
at all. They they have come to really enjoy wine, and it's something that we enjoy together. But no, I mean, I think for them it was very difficult to just given that I had grown up with them as musicians, and they always viewed me as a musician. I think that they thought I was crazy to go into like what even career is there in wine? Is it like bartending? What are you going to do? So I think they were just confused more than anything. They've definitely come around, but for me, it was a choice that I was really excited to make. To be perfectly frank, it wasn't always easy. I mean, there definitely was something difficult about kind of who I knew myself to be and how I thought people perceived me as this person, and who was I? I'm a musician, and so there was an uncomfortable time where it's just like I don't know how to explain myself. I don't know how people are going to view me. I just this is like a different person that I've been for the last 20 something years. So that was brief, but it wasn't always easy. But again, like I've never regretted it. It was the best decision I ever made.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people here this evening dream of a career and just listening to your journeys but ultimately having to take that leap, as you said, Vanessa, and hopefully the wine net appears. For both of you, I mean, has there ever been an unusual situation that's happened while you were working in a restaurant or in a tasting room? Any memories you have of those times before you got to Wine Access?
Like every night working at Press.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Does one
Well, I
stand
mean,
out?
well, yeah, you have to keep in mind, like Press was this place, and Vanessa's been there a number of times. It's
Yeah.
literally in the middle of Napa Valley, and it's like the winemaker's
Mm,
water cooler, in addition to being the
Yeah.
place where all the
Hmm.
tourists filter through. So you have this really interesting intersection of, the who's who of the wine world, and then these tourists who are like children in Disney World for the very first time. And that
Yeah.
always makes for some very interesting stories. But, we had some amazing guests come through Press, and I have been very fortunate to have great conversations. And in fact, that was sort of, at least on my side, the impetus for the theme of our podcast, which is to not have any wine professionals on there. We're just going to talk to, some of the people that we might have interacted with at Press that were not in the wine scene. But
okay.
I mean, I think one of the most monumental nights was, one of the very first times I met Robert Parker. He
Ah.
came in, and he, always had a smile on his face, was, super warm and personable, and came
And
over,
just for
said
those who don't
hello.
know, he's the famous U.S. critic who really popularized wine scores. Just in
Yes.
case some folks don't know him, but I'm sure most wine lovers
Yeah.
will. Yeah.
Yeah, and in Napa Valley, I mean, he's sort of a legend. But yeah, so Robert Parker comes in, and super nice, very warm, comes over, introduces himself, whips out a bottle of wine, and he goes, he was like, "Have you ever had this before?" And I looked at it,
Really?
and I recognized the label, but I didn't recognize the color of the wine inside of it. And I was like, "Yeah, but I didn't know they made a white wine." He was like, "I know, me neither. Let's try it." So he said, "Go grab a glass and meet me in the back. We'll taste it." And it was, the very first time either of us had had a white Screaming Eagle,
Oh,
and which is, for anyone who
famous
doesn't know,
California? Yeah.
yes, very famous, probably the most expensive California, or yeah, California wine, ever made. And
Yeah. Didn't
when in
it?
the
Didn't
when
one of them go for like $500,000 a bottle at auction or something like that? I don't
Yeah,
know
it
if I
was a
have the
large
number right,
format
but
that went at
yeah.
auction Napa
Yes.
Valley, and it was 500,000. Yeah, so, and it was the
Okay.
first vintage. So yeah, the most,
Wow.
I think to date, the most expensive single bottle of wine ever sold. But so yeah, so that was one
Wow.
of my most wonderful memories, is drinking white
That's
Screaming Eagle, with Robert Parker in the private dining room
Squeak.
of Press.
Wow, that's amazing. That's fantastic. What a great memory. And how about you,
Yeah.
Vanessa?
I feel like restaurants have all the best stories, actually,
Yeah,
way
but
more
like
than
it has
retail.
to be something at Mondavi, right?
Yeah.
Actually think I will just say in terms of just sort of bizarre or puzzling, I do remember back in retail in New York coming in the shop one morning, and I thought that we had been robbed because
Oh,
the window was shattered, and there was like, just things just placed all over the floor, and I couldn't figure out what was going on, and then I realized that we had just recently brought in a sparkling wine. We had these, display racks in the wall, and apparently it started re-fermenting,
Oh,
and a number of corks overnight had actually, shot out of the bottles, and they had exploded and basically wreaked havoc over one whole
oh
side.
my God.
Luckily, this was at night when no one was in the store. But
Yeah, they can go as fast as bullets or whatever. I mean, they've been clocked
yeah,
at 90 miles an hour. Yeah, I can
yeah.
imagine.
So
Wow. That's quite the experience. Okay, cool. So, both of you, as I mentioned, are very highly trained. Vanessa, you're a master of wine. You're a baby master of wine. I mean, you're a new master of wine, 2020?
it's about almost about a year ago.
Okay, a year
Yes,
ago. Okay.
yes,
So